The morning mist clung to the Delaware River like a shroud as General George Washington gazed across the ice-choked waters on December 25, 1776. Behind him, the Continental Army, what remained of it, huddled around, dying campfires, their bare feet leaving bloody prints in the snow. The revolution teetered on the brink of collapse, and Washington knew that without a miracle, the cause of American independence would die with the coming dawn. The situation had grown increasingly desperate following the disastrous defeats in New York. The Continental Army had been reduced from 20,000 men to fewer than 3,000 effective soldiers. Enlistments were set to expire on December 31st, and morale had plummeted to dangerous lows. Many colonists had begun to question whether the rebellion against British rule was worth the mounting casualties and suffering. Washington's spies had brought him crucial intelligence about the Hessian garrison stationed in Trenton, New Jersey. Colonel Johann Gottlieb Rahl commanded approximately 1,500 professional German mercenaries who had settled into winter quarters, believing the American rebels too weak and demoralized to mount any significant offensive. The Hessians had grown complacent, their discipline relaxed by holiday celebrations, and the assumption that no army would dare attack in such brutal winter conditions. The General's War Council had been divided on the audacious plan Washington proposed. Some officers argued that the Continental Army was in no condition to launch an offensive, particularly one requiring a treacherous river crossing in the dead of winter. The men lacked proper winter clothing, many were sick, and their equipment was in poor condition. Artillery pieces were limited, and ammunition supplies remained dangerously low. However, Washington understood that desperate times demanded desperate measures. The political situation was equally precarious, with the Continental Congress having fled Philadelphia and public support for the war effort waning rapidly. Several prominent colonial leaders had already begun exploring reconciliation with the British Crown, sensing that continued resistance might prove futile. According to historical accounts documented in David Hackett Fisher's Washington's Crossing, the general spent considerable time studying maps and consulting with local guides who knew the Delaware River's treacherous currents and hidden obstacles. The plan Washington devised was both simple and extraordinarily risky. 3 separate columns would cross the Delaware River simultaneously at different points, converging on Trenton before dawn on December 26th. The main force, under Washington's personal command, would cross at McConkey's Ferry, while smaller contingents would cross at Trenton Ferry and Bordentown. The coordinated attack would catch the Hessians completely off guard, potentially delivering the Continental Army its first significant victory in months. As evening approached on Christmas Day, Washington made his final preparations. He knew that failure would likely mean the end of the revolution and his own capture or death. The British had placed a substantial bounty on his head, and King George III had declared all rebel leaders to be traitors deserving of execution. The stakes could not have been higher for the young nation struggling to establish its independence. The general's personal resolve remained unshakable, despite the overwhelming odds. He had witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of British occupation on colonial communities and understood that retreat was no longer an option. The Continental Army's survival depended entirely on this single, desperate gamble against one of Europe's most formidable military powers. The wind howled across the Delaware River as Washington's men began their perilous journey into history. Captain Alexander Hamilton struggled to keep his artillery pieces stable in the shallow boats, while chunks of ice the size of millstones threatened to crush the wooden vessels. The temperature had plummeted well below freezing, and many soldiers wrapped their feet in cloth torn from their own uniforms to prevent frostbite during the 9-hour ordeal that lay ahead. Colonel John Glover's Massachusetts fishermen proved invaluable during the crossing, their expertise with boats in treacherous waters saving countless lives as they navigated the ice-filled river. These seasoned mariners had volunteered their services to the Continental cause, bringing with them skills that would prove essential to the mission's success. Without their knowledge of river currents and ice navigation, Washington's bold plan would have ended in disaster before it truly began. The crossing proved more difficult than anyone had anticipated. What Washington had hoped would take 3 hours stretched into nearly 9, as boats struggled against powerful currents and floating ice barriers. Several soldiers fell into the frigid water and had to be pulled to safety, their wet clothing freezing solid within minutes. The horses carrying the artillery grew increasingly panicked as ice chunks struck the sides of their transport boats, threatening to overturn the precious cannons that would be crucial for the upcoming battle. Lieutenant James Monroe, who would later become the 5th President of the United States, helped guide one of the artillery pieces across the treacherous waters. The future president was just 18 years old at the time, but his steady nerves and quick thinking helped prevent the loss of several crucial weapons. Many of the soldiers who participated in this desperate crossing would go on to play significant roles in the founding and early governance of the American Republic. As the night wore on, Washington received disturbing news from his other crossing points. The contingents at Trenton Ferry and Bordentown had been unable to complete their river crossings due to even worse ice conditions at their locations. This meant that Washington's main force would have to attack the heavily fortified town alone, without the benefit of coordinated assaults from multiple directions as originally planned. The general faced a crucial decision as dawn approached. He could abort the mission and return his army safely across the river, preserving what remained of the Continental forces for future battles. Alternatively, he could press forward with the attack despite being significantly outnumbered and lacking the element of surprise that multiple simultaneous assaults would have provided. The weight of the entire revolutionary cause rested on this single moment of decision. Washington chose to advance. His men, though exhausted from the river crossing and suffering from exposure to the brutal winter conditions, responded to their commander's determination with renewed courage. They understood that this battle could determine whether their sacrifices over the past months had been in vain, or whether they were on the verge of delivering a blow that could revitalize the struggling independence movement. The Continental Army began its march toward Trenton as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. Their footsteps crunched through the snow-covered roads as they moved in columns through the Pennsylvania countryside, leaving behind the relative safety of their winter encampments for what many believed might be their final battle. The fate of American independence now depended entirely on the outcome of the next few hours, and every soldier understood the magnitude of what they were attempting to accomplish against such overwhelming odds. The streets of Trenton lay shrouded in an eerie silence as Washington's Continental Army approached the sleeping town on the morning of December 26, 1776. Colonel Rahl and his Hessian troops had celebrated Christmas with considerable enthusiasm, consuming large quantities of alcohol and relaxing their usual military vigilance. The professional German soldiers, accustomed to European warfare's conventions, had never imagined that their American opponents would dare launch an attack during such severe winter weather conditions. Washington divided his force into two primary columns as they neared Trenton's outskirts. General Nathanael Greene would lead one column along the Pennington Road to attack the town from the north, while General John Sullivan's column would advance along the river road to strike from the west. This pincer movement would trap the Hessians in the center of town, preventing their escape while maximizing the Continental Army's limited numerical advantage through superior positioning and tactical coordination. The attack began at precisely 8 o'clock in the morning when Captain William Washington and Lieutenant James Monroe led an advance guard that overwhelmed the Hessian sentries before they could raise an alarm. The surprise was complete and devastating, with many German soldiers still in their beds or struggling to comprehend what was happening as Continental forces poured into the town from multiple directions simultaneously. Captain Alexander Hamilton's artillery battery quickly seized control of King Street and Queen Street, the two main thoroughfares running through Trenton's center. The young officer, who would later become the first Secretary of the Treasury, directed his cannons with deadly precision, preventing Hessian forces from organizing any coherent defense or counterattack. The psychological impact of the artillery bombardment proved as important as its physical destruction, creating panic among enemy troops who had expected no serious military action during the winter months. Colonel Rahl himself was mortally wounded while attempting to rally his scattered forces near the town's center. The Hessian commander had been caught completely off guard by the intensity and coordination of the American attack, and his death effectively ended any organized resistance from the professional German troops. Without their commanding officer's leadership, the Hessian soldiers found themselves unable to mount the disciplined response that their military training would normally have provided in such circumstances. Historical documentation from the New Jersey Historical Society archives indicates that many Hessian soldiers initially believed they were under attack by a much larger force due to the coordinated nature of Washington's assault and the effective use of artillery to control key strategic positions throughout the town. The battle lasted less than 2 hours, but its impact on the Revolutionary War's trajectory would prove immeasurable. Continental forces captured nearly 900 Hessian prisoners, while suffering fewer than a dozen casualties themselves. More importantly, they seized badly needed weapons, ammunition, and supplies that would help sustain the Continental Army through the remaining winter months when resources were critically scarce. The victory at Trenton represented far more than a tactical success on the battlefield. It demonstrated that the Continental Army could defeat professional European troops when properly led and strategically positioned, providing a massive boost to American morale at a time when the independence movement had seemed on the verge of complete collapse. News of the victory spread rapidly throughout the colonies, reinvigorating support for the revolutionary cause and encouraging new recruits to join Washington's forces. Washington immediately recognized the strategic importance of consolidating his gains. Rather than retreating back across the Delaware River, he decided to maintain his position in New Jersey, setting the stage for additional confrontations with British and Hessian forces in the region. This decision would prove crucial in maintaining the momentum generated by the stunning victory at Trenton and preventing enemy forces from regaining their psychological advantage over the Continental Army. The news of Washington's victory at Trenton spread through the colonies like wildfire, igniting a spark of hope that had been all but extinguished during the dark months following the defeats around New York City. In taverns from Boston to Charleston, colonists who had begun to question the wisdom of rebellion against the British Crown suddenly found renewed faith in their cause. The impossible had happened. A ragtag Continental Army had defeated seasoned European professionals in open combat, proving that American independence was more than just a distant dream. General William Howe, commanding British forces in North America, received the news of the Trenton defeat with considerable alarm. The loss of an entire Hessian regiment represented a significant military setback, but the psychological impact on British strategy proved even more concerning. Howe had believed that the Continental Army was essentially defeated and that the rebellion would collapse during the winter months without requiring additional major military operations. The British response was swift and decisive. General Charles Cornwallis, who had been preparing to return to England for the winter, was ordered to gather a substantial force and recapture Trenton immediately. King George III and his ministers in London viewed the American victory as an unacceptable humiliation that threatened to encourage rebellion in other parts of the British Empire, particularly in Ireland and India, where independence movements were already stirring. Washington understood that his victory at Trenton would inevitably provoke a massive British counterattack. Rather than retreating to safety across the Delaware River, he made the audacious decision to advance further into New Jersey and establish defensive positions near Princeton. This bold move demonstrated remarkable strategic vision, as it forced the British to fight on ground of Washington's choosing while maintaining the psychological momentum generated by the Trenton victory. The Continental Army's morale transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Soldiers who had been on the verge of desertion just days earlier now spoke confidently about defeating the British Empire. Enlistments, which had been set to expire on December 31st, were extended by many volunteers who wanted to participate in what they now believed could be a winning cause. The victory had proven that proper leadership and tactical innovation could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Colonial newspapers, which had been printing increasingly pessimistic reports about the war's progress, suddenly filled their pages with detailed accounts of Washington's brilliant river crossing and surprise attack. The Pennsylvania Journal wrote extensively about the battle's tactical innovations, while the Boston Gazette emphasized the psychological impact of defeating professional European soldiers. These publications played a crucial role in spreading news of the victory throughout the colonies and building support for continued resistance against British rule. According to accounts preserved in the Continental Congress records, delegates who had been considering peace negotiations with British representatives suddenly began discussing more aggressive military strategies and the possibility of securing formal alliance with France and other European powers opposed to British expansion. The French government, which had been secretly providing limited support to the American rebels, took particular notice of the Trenton victory. King Louis XVI and his ministers began to view the Continental Army as a potentially viable military force capable of sustaining a prolonged conflict against British power. This shift in French perception would eventually lead to the formal military alliance that proved essential to American victory in the Revolutionary War. International opinion of the American rebellion began to change dramatically following news of Washington's victory. European powers that had previously viewed the colonial independence movement as a hopeless cause started to reconsider their positions, recognizing that a successful American revolution could significantly weaken British global influence and create new opportunities for their own imperial ambitions in North America and other contested regions around the world. The strategic implications of the Trenton victory extended far beyond its immediate military impact, establishing the foundation for the Continental Army's transformation from a desperate collection of colonial militias into a professional fighting force capable of challenging the world's most powerful military empire on equal terms. Cornwallis assembled a formidable force of 8,000 British and Hessian troops and began marching toward Trenton with grim determination on January 1st, 1777. The British general was confident that his overwhelming numerical superiority would quickly crush Washington's Continental Army and restore British control over New Jersey. However, the American commander had no intention of fighting a conventional battle against such odds, instead preparing to demonstrate once again that unconventional tactics could triumph over superior numbers and firepower. Washington positioned his forces along Assunpink Creek, south of Trenton, creating the impression that he intended to make a desperate last stand against Cornwallis's advancing army. The Continental troops worked frantically to construct earthworks and defensive positions while British forces approached through the winter landscape. As evening fell on January 2nd, the two armies faced each other across the frozen creek, with British commanders confident that the following morning would bring the final destruction of organized American resistance in the region. The night of January 2nd brought one of the most audacious maneuvers in military history. While leaving a skeleton force to maintain campfires and create the illusion of continued occupation, Washington quietly moved the bulk of his army around Cornwallis's left flank under cover of darkness. The Continental soldiers wrapped their wagon wheels in cloth to muffle the sound of their movement, and strict orders were issued to maintain absolute silence during the nighttime march that would determine the fate of the revolution. As dawn broke on January 3rd, Cornwallis discovered that his quarry had vanished during the night, leaving behind only a few hundred men to maintain the deception. The British general, who had earned the nickname the Fox Hunter for his aggressive pursuit tactics, found himself outmaneuvered by an opponent he had previously dismissed as militarily incompetent. Washington had achieved complete tactical surprise once again, demonstrating that innovative leadership could compensate for significant disadvantages in troops and equipment. The Continental Army struck at Princeton with devastating effect, catching British forces completely unprepared for combat. The attack began at sunrise when American advance units encountered British troops marching out of Princeton toward Trenton, unaware that Washington's army was approaching from an unexpected direction. The collision between these forces triggered a running battle that would demonstrate the Continental Army's growing confidence and tactical sophistication. Captain Hamilton's artillery battery once again played a crucial role in the American victory, positioning their cannons to devastating effect against British formations attempting to organize defensive positions. The young artillery officer's tactical innovations and aggressive deployment of firepower had become a hallmark of Washington's military strategy, proving that American forces could match European professionals in the technical aspects of 18th century warfare. Military historians, including those cited in Richard Ketchum's The Winter Soldiers, note that the Princeton victory was particularly significant because it demonstrated the Continental Army's ability to execute complex tactical maneuvers under challenging conditions while maintaining unit cohesion and fighting effectiveness. The battle at Princeton lasted approximately 45 minutes, but its psychological impact proved far more significant than its duration might suggest. British forces that had dominated New Jersey just weeks earlier suddenly found themselves in full retreat, abandoning substantial quantities of military supplies and equipment. The twin victories at Trenton and Princeton had completely transformed the strategic situation in the mid-Atlantic region, forcing British commanders to reconsider their entire approach to suppressing the American rebellion. Washington's successful execution of these two coordinated operations established his reputation as a military genius, capable of competing with Europe's finest generals. The Continental Army had proven that American forces could not only defeat professional European troops, but could do so repeatedly when properly led and strategically positioned. These victories provided the foundation for the Continental Army's evolution into a truly professional military organization capable of sustaining prolonged conflict against the British Empire's vast military resources and experienced officer corps. The twin victories at Trenton and Princeton fundamentally altered the trajectory of the American Revolution, transforming what had appeared to be a hopeless colonial rebellion into a legitimate war of independence with realistic prospects for success. Washington's brilliant winter campaign had accomplished far more than simply winning two tactical engagements. It had proven that American forces could defeat the world's most powerful military empire when led by innovative commanders willing to challenge conventional military wisdom and adapt their strategies to local conditions. The psychological impact of these victories extended far beyond their immediate military significance. Throughout the colonies, Americans who had begun to lose faith in the independence movement suddenly found renewed hope and determination to continue their struggle against British rule. Recruitment for the Continental Army increased dramatically, as young men who had previously been reluctant to join what seemed like a lost cause now eagerly volunteered to serve under the commander who had achieved the impossible against overwhelming odds. International recognition of American military capabilities grew substantially following news of Washington's winter campaign. The French government, which had been providing covert assistance to the American rebels, began seriously considering formal military alliance with the Continental Congress. King Louis XVI and his advisors recognized that a successful American Revolution could significantly weaken British global power and create opportunities for French expansion in North America and other contested regions around the world. The British government's response to these unexpected defeats revealed the growing strain that the American rebellion was placing on imperial resources and strategic planning. King George III and his ministers had initially expected to suppress colonial resistance through a combination of military intimidation and political concessions, but Washington's victories demonstrated that the Americans possessed both the military capability and political determination necessary to sustain prolonged resistance against British rule. General Howe's strategic position in North America became increasingly precarious following the loss of control over New Jersey. The British commander had planned to use the winter months to consolidate his gains from the New York campaign and prepare for a decisive spring offensive that would finally crush organized American resistance. Instead, he found himself forced to divert substantial resources to defending previously secure positions while dealing with the growing threat posed by an increasingly confident and capable Continental Army. The tactical innovations demonstrated during the Trenton and Princeton campaigns influenced military thinking far beyond the immediate context of the American Revolution. Washington's use of surprise attacks, coordinated multi-column advances, and strategic deception became standard elements of military doctrine that would be studied and emulated by commanders throughout the world. The idea that unconventional tactics could overcome superior numbers and equipment became a cornerstone of military strategy that continues to influence warfare in the modern era. Contemporary accounts, including those preserved in the George Washington Papers at the Library of Congress, indicate that European military observers were particularly impressed by the Continental Army's ability to execute complex tactical maneuvers while maintaining unit discipline and fighting effectiveness under extremely challenging weather conditions. The long-term consequences of Washington's winter campaign extended well beyond the immediate military sphere, establishing the foundation for American diplomatic success in securing crucial foreign alliances. The demonstration of American military competence convinced European powers that the Continental Congress represented a legitimate government capable of fulfilling international obligations and maintaining effective resistance against British attempts to restore colonial rule through military force. Washington's victories at Trenton and Princeton proved that the American Revolution was not merely a colonial uprising destined for inevitable failure, but rather a serious challenge to British imperial power that would require sustained military effort to suppress. These battles marked the beginning of the Continental Army's transformation from a desperate collection of colonial militias into a professional fighting force capable of challenging the British Empire on equal terms, ultimately leading to American independence and the birth of a new nation founded on the principles of liberty, democracy, and self-determination.